Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Music for a Book podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Britt.
And I'm Hannah.
And every 2 weeks, we read and review a book, assign a song to that book, draw the parallels between the two, and have some fun along the way. So welcome back to Season 2, Episode 10 of the Music for a Book podcast.
Yes, and this week, we chose a standalone fantasy that's set in modern times. This was also one of the Good Morning America Book Club picks and a Book of the Month pick, too, previously. Yep. So this book is called Ink Blood Sister Scribe by Emma Törzs. I believe that's how we pronounce her last name.
I think so. Something like that.
Yes, but yeah, excited to talk about this one.
All right. So how this episode is going to work is we are going to go over trigger warnings in a brief synopsis for the book, and then we are going to reveal our song choices. After we reveal our song choices, we're going to move into what we like to call spoiler territory, meaning that if you have not read the book, past that point, anything and everything that happened to cover is open to be discussed. So there will be spoilers. So if you don't want the book spoiled for you, you want to read it and come back, we recommend pausing the podcast, then reading and popping back in once you've done so after that. Dear reader,
all right, as always, check your specific trigger warnings before you read a book if there's something that you want to avoid. The general ones for this book are a lot of blood, talks of blood. It's in the title. It's a very prominent theme. Death of a parent, death, kidnapping, violence, bodily injury, use of guns, abandonment, gaslighting, some medical content. Like always, again, just check your own triggers before if there's something you want to avoid.
Yes. All right, and then a brief synopsis of the book. I grabbed this one from Barnes & Noble, actually. So it says, for generations, the Kalate family has guarded a collection of ancient and rare books. Books that let a person walk through walls or manipulate the elements. Books of magic that half-sisters Joanna and Esther have been raised to revere and protect. All magic comes with a price, though, and for years, these sisters have been separated. Esther has fled to a remote base in Antarctica to escape the fate that killed her own mother, and Joanna has isolated herself in their family home in Vermont, devoting her life to the study of these cherished volumes. But after their father dies suddenly while reading a book Joanna has never seen before, the sisters must reunite to preserve their family legacy. In the process, they'll uncover a world of magic far bigger and more dangerous than they ever imagined, and all the secrets their parents kept hidden, secrets that span centuries, continents, and even other libraries.
All right. Now, the best part of the episode, song choices.
Song choices. So I picked a song that I feel like was kind of the conclusion of the book, the overall theme, like as they moved out. So I actually ended up picking The Dog Days Are Over by Florence and the Machine.
We love Florence.
Yes.
I picked The Bolter by Taylor Swift.
That was the one I was looking at.
So I was so that was my second choice, but when you said you didn't pick a TTPD song, I was like, all right, I'll pick it, because I thought maybe if you were going to pick one.
Yes, it was between The Bolter and The Prophecy were the two that I was looking at. I just couldn't commit, but then I heard Dog Days Are Over and I was like, yeah, this is the vibe.
My second one was going to be A Writer in the Dark by Lorde.
I also looked at Lorde. I feel like we both have once we feel like a vibe, we are in the same lane. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about those later.
Yes. All right. Spoiler territory.
Spoiler territory.
This book definitely had a lot of foreshadows, so we will probably pull a lot from the end at the beginning. So if you don't want to get it spoiled, then go read the book and come back.
Exactly.
Otherwise, stay on this ride with us.
Let's talk about Ink Blood Sister Scribe.
What were your initial thoughts with it?
So I was very thrown off because all of the fantasy that I have personally read as an adult has not really been set in a modern world. And not just I know that there are fantasies set in more modern times, but this was straight up, they're in the United States, they're in Antarctica, everywhere else has been some sort of made up kingdom. And so that threw me for a loop at first, because I'm but where's the magic? Where does it come in? So I think that categorizes this as technically a low fantasy, but I feel like this is a really good entry level into fantasy, because there's minimal world building. The magic system's pretty easy to understand once everything unfolds.
And it felt more thriller-ish to me.
Yeah.
It was a good a thriller mixed with magic, more so to me than a big giant fantasy book. So
I agree.
I know, like the Beatles t-shirt randomly thrown in there. Just like
Yeah.
random little like pop culture things that I thought was cool too.
Yeah.
So this book starts out, it has a 2-page prologue where we find out that Abe, who is the father in this story, dies in his front yard with a book and a note. And this note reads, "Joanna, I'm sorry. Don't let your mother in. Keep this book safe and away from your blood. I love you so much. Tell Esther." And Joanna is the only one at home. It's just her and Abe that are living at the house. And Joanna finds it odd that there's no punctuation after "Tell Esther." So she's like, what does this mean? So we get introduced to 2 members of the family in this prologue here. And then Esther, right? Who's this mysterious person, right? Like, tell Esther what?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, what did this book do to him?
Yeah, it did start out like with a bang. And I will say, like, the first chunk of the book, in my opinion, was very slow. Like, if we had read this on our own and I didn't read it for the podcast, I'm not sure I would have pushed through. But I will say, I'm really glad that I did. Like, I genuinely ended up loving the story. I thought it was really well written. But like, I think it does suffer a little bit at the hands of like too much of like a slow pace.
Yeah. And I feel like it almost depends on like which character you like kind of attach to.
Yeah.
I feel like the sisters, because like the first chapter is Esther. And I feel like I wanted to know more about Esther. And then it was like a chapter of Joanna. And I'm like,
yeah,
I don't care.
Correct.
I don't know. So I feel like that definitely impacts it. Then there's like a third character that's thrown in and you're like, wait a second. I thought this was about sisters. Like,
yeah, you're like, what's going on? But you know, it's still interesting. But yeah, I thought the pacing was a little rough at the beginning.
But I did like that it wasn't like a huge fantasy world building where like you had to keep up with all these new countries and like new political things and everything. I'm thankful it wasn't that
very straightforward. Yeah.
But so part 1 is called Mirror Magic. So we meet Esther and she is in Antarctica. And we find out that like every year she like goes to a new place because her father warned her that like she needs to keep moving. I think it's like every November 2nd, and she needs to keep moving. And if she doesn't, she's going to be found and then she's going to die just like her mother did.
Yep.
But while in Antarctica, you know, our girl Esther falls in love,
of course,
with an Australian named Pearl.
Yes.
Who they are in Antarctica working, which is so random. I'm like, where did Esther find this like random like Antarctica job?
Right.
And then but one night they go to like this party almost.
Yeah, it felt like, I was like, okay. I mean, I guess the people in Antarctica do need to club a little. Like,
yeah. And then she like smells this like familiar scent. And she's like, they're drinking, you know, a lot of this going on. And then she goes to the bathroom and she sees on the mirror that there's like blood smears on the corner and tries to smear it off. And she realizes that it's mirror magic. And so like kind of freaks her out because it like takes her back to like her childhood and, you know, the books that were there at home. What we kind of know about mirror magic is like, I think it's briefly touched in here and like goes in deeper. It's like a lot of the mirror magic is like a one-way mirror, so like you can see through it. And Esther's like freaking out because she's like, is somebody watching me? Like, is somebody watching me in all these mirrors? And kind of freaks her out because she decided to stay. So now she's like, uh-oh, did I make the right choice?
Then we get our first chapter from Joanna. And the one thing too is, I feel like because I did do most of this on audio and I did follow along with the book at some point, I feel like if the chapters had been labeled with like whose POV it was, it might have been a little bit easier for me to follow at first, because it doesn't. It just is like chapter 1, chapter 2.
Or even location. Like if it wasn't, like, because since it's not in first person, like if it was like Vermont.
Yeah, England, Antarctica, like anything like that. But we get our first chapter from Joanna. And like we said in the synopsis, she is at their childhood home in Vermont. Now, this home, she is basically like bound to her home to protect these books. Like that is her sole job. And we get a little bit from Joanna about growing up and, you know, the little spells that she used to be able to do. And the house is actually warded. So there are wards around the house that go around the perimeter. And this prevents the house from being found. And in turn helps prevent Joanna and the books from being found. There is a cute little subplot that I just adore. I love a little animal subplot. So there is like a stray cat that's on the porch with Joanna, and like the relationship that they like have as the cat opens up to her throughout the book. I just loved that like fun little, side plot. Joanna's whole life has been dedicated to these books. After getting the note from her dad to keep her mom out, she has done just that. Even though Cecily does live nearby, she does see her frequently. She does make a plan to meet with Cecily. Cecily wanted to come back to Joanna's house. Joanna just is like, absolutely not. You will not come back to this house. I can come to you though. We can do lunch together. I can come to you. And the reason that she's nervous is because we learned that Cecily at one point tried to take the wards down. Like Abe, their father, had caught her burning or attempting to burn books and to burn the wards and to bring them down. Between that and the dying note from Abe, Joanna's probably like, yeah, I don't feel like I'm going to trust Cecily. I feel like we're probably not going to do that.
Yeah. And if you didn't pick up on it, Joanna and Esther are half sisters. So
Yes.
Esther's mom, we believe, is dead. And then Cecily has been around basically since Esther was like 1, 2, I think, like mostly her whole life. So
yeah.
Then we are introduced to our third main character, Mr. Nicholas. And Nicholas lives in England, in this big elaborate mansion house. Very fancy, living the life. He lives with his uncle Richard and Richard's partner Maram. We find out that he can write spells. He wrote this spell for this vintage wine. He is trapped in this house because his uncle says that there's a threat to him. So he's been his life has been threatened. And there's an assassination attempt on Nicholas. And his bodyguard Collins saves his life by shooting the guy that was attacking him.
Mm-hmm.
And now Nicholas is being trapped in this house to for his own safety. The one thing that we noted too is Nicholas notices this bee that's at the night of his assassination.
Yeah.
It comes in handy down the line.
Yes. And then we kind of come back around to Esther, who again is in Antarctica. And after she finds the mirror and she thinks that there's mirror magic happening, she starts to kind of act a little cagey and a little dodgy, and Pearl's picking up on it. And Pearl immediately is thinking oh, this is about me. This is about us. This is about you being in a relationship with a woman, is kind of the vibe that I got. Are you uncomfortable because they're not showing PDA? They're having these issues, but it really is just because Esther's fuck, I shouldn't have stayed another season. Someone's looking at me. Someone's coming to find me. I didn't move after the year for the first time since I was basically told, Esther was told point blank, you will jeopardize your sister, us, the books, your whole family. You have to stay away, period. And so she's panicking. And then one night she does search the mirrors again. She finds a mirror in a bathroom and it has blood around it. And so she's waiting. She's someone is on the other side waiting for me. And she waits and waits, nothing happens. She almost gives up hope. But all of a sudden, communication slips through the mirror, lands into the little sink. And in this communication, it is a note and plane tickets with a fake passport. And it just says, basically, trust me, your sister is in danger. You are needed at home. You have to go. And she is so conflicted because she was told that her going home automatically means danger for the family because Esther is unaffected by magic. So Esther cannot perform magic. Esther cannot, do any sort of spells. She can't write books. She can't do any of these things. But that also means things don't work on her. So if she goes home and the wards are up, the wards protect people, but the wards can't protect Esther. And because she's being tracked and being followed and being traced, they're going to lead her right to Joanna. So we just see a lot of this internal battle that Esther has. Is it worth it? Because the plane leaves 3 days from when that came through the mirror. So she doesn't have a lot of time. And again, she's in Antarctica. So there's not a whole lot of options for getting out of there.
No. Just take a cargo plane.
Yeah, literally.
To go. So while Nicholas is being trapped, right, he is frustrated and he's supposed to be writing truth spells for his uncle to quote unquote find out who threatened Nicholas, right? And Richard can tell like that Nicholas is kind of frustrated. So he brings out a vampire book for Nicholas to destroy and kind of just lighten his spirits up a little bit.
Yeah.
So a vampire book is like the library term for a very specific subset of protection spells that dated back to 15th century Romania. So like, you know, Dracula time, right? So that's where the vampire spell came about, the title. The vampire spell was attached to books whose own spells had already been activated as sort of a sadistic punishment for attempted tampering. So anyone who added their own blood to one of these activated books was drained absolutely dry, bled effectively to death. The vampire books were the only ones that the library actually destroyed. So Nicholas destroyed this vampire book and it kind of lightened his spirits up a little bit. Thanks, Uncle Richard.
Thanks so much.
Right? It's the little things. So then we go back to Miss Joanna. And Joanna goes to her mom's house because she's like, you know, I'm not letting my mom come over. Like, Cecily's not allowed.
Yeah.
Joanna gets like an uneasy feeling and realizes that Cecily actually trapped her in this house. Joanna's like, excuse me. Like, I need to go put the wards up. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And Cecily's like, nope. Like, you're staying here. I need the wards down. And so they kind of like make a deal. Like, Joanna will be let out of the house if Cecily can come to their old house. And like, Joanna's like very nervous about it, but she's like, you know, all right, I'm going to blindfold her and we'll we'll make it work. So they arrange that plan.
Yep.
In the meantime, Ram has left Nicholas like a cryptic message and a note for him to kind of figure out when her and Richard are away for a little while. And Nicholas is like, what the heck? Why would she leave me this note? Why can't she just explicitly tell me? And kind of like sends him on like almost like a wild goose chase around the library to try to figure out what she means. He finds that there's a spell book that he finds that would let him like walk through things. So Nicholas needs Collins to read this spell because Nicholas is in the same boat as Esther. Like, magic does not impact him. He can't perform magic. He's just kind of there. But something interesting about Nicholas is he can write spells.
Yes.
So he can write it. So just a little difference between him and Esther that we have right now.
Yeah, Nicholas is technically considered a scribe, and with scribes, their blood is the thing that's used to ink the spells. You know, like Hannah said, it doesn't affect them. They can't use the spells, but they can write them. And so we have like the sequence at some point in this book where Richard, his uncle, sits down with Nicholas, and we watch the process of how they draw the blood for the scribe to actually write the spell. So there's a connection to music that I thought was really interesting. Typically what happens with the scribe is they sit down and they sing a song. It doesn't have to be like a religious song. It can be any song that has some sort of like emotional impact on them. And it's thought that the stronger the emotional connection and the emotional tie that they have to the song that they picked, the stronger the spell is going to be when the blood comes through. So basically, this is like kind of the medical portion of it. So it's not terrible, but just be forewarned, there's a lot of blood and needle talk about to be happening. So
yeah, honestly, I like blocked that out. I mean, I know it happened, but
yeah. So
one of the songs they sing though, it's like further down, but it's like a Nirvana song.
I was dying during that part. I was laughing so hard, like, because I could picture how bad it was to be like the hello.
Right.
But basically, like, Nicholas is wrapped up in a little tourniquet, and after he's done singing, they feel good. His uncle plunges a needle into his arm and extracts blood from him. You know, once that process is done, they actually like take the blood and mix it. And I'm sure it was in something other than this, but all I could picture mentally was a Spirit Halloween cauldron.
No,
that was like yay big and with a little plastic rickety handle on top. It was like when I was reading ACOTAR and I had to get out of my mind that it was, again, not a plastic cauldron that they were talking about. But they mix the blood with herbs and certain things like that. Then it forms the ink. And then from there, the scribe has to focus, like truly focus, because if there's any mistake made on the page, they have to start over. And obviously, like, blood is precious. Like, it's not just like a consistently renewable resource. Like, Nicholas has to recover because it's a lot of blood.
Right.
And there's talks about how it like impacts his body, but he writes out this spell book, And these spells have to be bound. So the books have to be bound in order for them to work. They don't have to be like glued and pressed and all this stuff, but they could be, threaded together, but there has to be an intention to bind the book with a cover. And that's like the basics of how the scribes write spell books. They write these magical books.
After this wild goose chase around the library, Nicholas convinces Collins to help him, and Collins is his bodyguard.
Yes.
And Collins is under an NDA, like can't even tell Nicholas his first name, like can't tell him anything really, like he's just sworn to secrecy.
And these are magical NDAs, so it's not just like like if they go to say something, they literally start like choking on their words.
Yeah.
Like they just
cannot. Yeah, they're not able to.
Yep.
But Nicholas promises Collins that he will write a spell to reverse his NDA if he helps him right now.
Yes.
And Collins is like, okay. But they do it, and they find a secret passageway.
Yes.
Then we go back to Antarctica.
We sure do. And Pearl is now confronting Esther about her plans to leave because Pearl overheard that Esther's leaving. There was also, Esther had a book stolen from her room, which was one of Abe's books. And it was one that had been passed down for her. So she immediately is like, Pearl took my fucking book. Pearl was the only one in the room. She dropped off soup. So there's this like hostility and tension, and you're not really sure who to trust or like what's going on. But basically Pearl goes skiing with Trev, with one of the guys. They go skiing, and Esther starts chucking through Pearl's room during this time. She's like, it's my time to shine, baby. I'm going to search for this book. Doesn't find anything.
Of course not.
Of course she doesn't.
I'm like, is Pearl sketchy? But I'm like, I don't think Pearl's sketchy. I don't know.
No, I didn't get the vibe that she was sketchy. But then at that point, I was like, it is still early enough for me to not have like built enough trust with her. But she didn't give me the sketchy vibe. However, Esther did find some mirror magic in Pearl's room. And so she's like, okay, this is some shady shit. Some shady shit. Then Trev runs and finds Esther and is like, Pearl is hurt. You must come. She's in the infirmary. Come help. She fell while skiing. So they go to Pearl. And then in the infirmary, Trev's like, haha, bitches, locks him in, gun up. And he's like, yo, let's fucking fight, basically.
Right? And then Esther's like, okay. Like,
what?
Like, wait, what?
Trev had staged the whole thing that Pearl, like, fell while skiing. Instead, he, like, attacked her, broke her wrist, intentionally did this. He's like, yeah, one of you is going to die, basically. Like, sorry, Esther. Sorry to say. This is going to happen.
Yeah, and then the chapter ends, and I'm like,
yeah.
What? It's just ending on that?
Yeah. We love a little cliffhanger, a little minor cliffhanger.
But, like, the next couple chapters I thought were really good. So
I agree. Yes.
You find out a lot right here. So
I do feel like this is where, real quick, I feel like this is where I started to, like, connect into the story. Was, like, about here.
Because I think things started to connect, right? So
yes.
So we go back to Nicholas, and at the end of the secret passage is Richard's study, which is somewhere that, Nicholas does not go. And in this study, he finds a bunch of interesting things. Kind of reminisces, he finds like an old flying carpet spell that he wrote. There's a cute little chapter about him and Richard doing that spell years in the previous. I won't go in depth, but it is a cute little memory. Finds a draft of like an immortality spell, a spell like to track down other scribes. But the most interesting thing that he finds in this study is in a jar. And in this jar is a preserved eye. And not just anybody's eye. Nicholas's own eye. And Nicholas is like having this like, I feel like crisis. Like
he
out
is.
of body like experience. Like,
yes.
Excuse me? And Collins like is probably so frustrated because he can't say anything under like his NDA, And it's like, wait a second, like, are these threats, like the person that took my eye and the person that like assassinated me, like, are they true? Like, Nicholas like does not know what to believe right now. Like, this revelation is just crazy. And then in the room, there's a room attached to the study that they actually went through before they got to the study. That's like a room full of mirrors. And these mirrors are all labeled different things. And Collins like brings his attention to the mirror that says infirmary. And I thought this was really cool how we see this go down. So
I agree.
it is the mirror in the infirmary in Antarctica.
Yes.
So instead of like the chapter continuing from Esther's point of view,
Mhm.
we have the fight of her and Trev from the mirror
Mhm.
of Nicholas and Collins. So it's really
Yes.
cool how it's written. It's probably my favorite chapter in the whole book.
I agree. I really loved this part.
And so while they're watching this fight, they notice that who we believe is Trev is actually Nicholas's old bodyguard, Trethaway. And they're like, what is he doing there? Like, what? Collins knows a lot, but he can't talk about it, right? And so they're like watching this fight happen, like knowing they can't do anything to interfere because they're like, we're just watching this through the mirror.
Yeah.
Trev is like attacking Esther, and Esther's like basically getting choked to death, right?
Yeah.
And then Pearl comes up and smashes Trev over with a vase, and then ends up like shooting Trev. Esther knows about mirror magic, right? And is like, well, I could probably like has the thought, right, of like pushing him through the mirror, and she like tests it, and like his hand comes back all like mangled. Her hand like slips through and comes back and is fine.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. But they end up tossing Trev's body through the mirror, which if he wasn't dead before, he definitely is now.
He was.
And so like,
yeah, he's dead.
I just picture like Collins and Nicholas just like this body just comes through the mirror like, oh, okay. Like, right?
What do we do with this?
And so that's where we kind of leave that. And they're like, oh, we should probably get out of here. Like, one, we probably don't want to be found in this secret passageway. And two, not with this body that just came through this mirror.
Correct.
From this place that we have no idea where it is. Like, they don't know.
Yeah. Then we get the aftermath between Esther and Pearl. Basically, Esther's like, yeah, I gotta go. Like, I gotta get out of here. For Pearl's sake, she's like, I'm gonna explain something to you, but then you're gonna have to forget it. Because she makes Pearl recite a spell that has her, like, her recent memory erased. The problem is, everything that Esther has confessed to Pearl, magic being real, the books, the reason why she's fleeing, also gonna go with those memories. So when Pearl wakes up, she's gonna think that Esther just abandoned her in Antarctica with no explanation, nothing. Esther makes a promise she doesn't know if she'll be able to keep, but she promises this version of Pearl, the one who she believes deserves the version of events that actually happened, that one day she would tell her everything. She would come back, she would tell her, they would have that conversation. Again, Pearl won't remember it, but Esther does. So that is all that we have of Pearl for the time being.
Mirror magic continues back with Joanna and Cecily. So Cecily, is blindfolded, pulled through the wards, and goes into Esther's old bedroom and pulls out the mirror from the closet and sends a note through the mirror. Joanna does not understand what this means. So it's like 2 bullet pointed paragraphs, and it's, I don't know if you're still there or if this comes too late. You can see why I'm reaching out. Please find a way to tell me you have this under control or tell me what I can do. It is time to break my side of our agreement. As soon as you get this message, if you get this message, please end it. See. And so we don't know who it's being sent to, but it's getting put through the mirror. Cecily's like, that's what I needed to do.
Yep. Then when we come back to Nicholas, the kind of sequence of events for what scribes go through is what he is working to do with Richard now, except he's completely unfocused because he knows that his uncle has his eyeball floating in a jar in a fucking back hallway somewhere. And they just watched Trev get shot and shoved back through a mirror. And he's like, yeah, here's my blood for a spell. Hee hee.
Right, magic's so great. Yeah, awesome.
Woo. And so Richard's like, Nicholas pretends to be ill. And Richard sees right through it. He goes, you're not ill. You're just stubborn. You don't want to, it's very clear that the relationship that Richard and Nicholas have is mildly contentious in a way that I don't think would have ever been outwardly contentious up until the ending part. But I feel like Nicholas slowly started to realize everything that had been done to quote unquote protect him was being done to him by the people that were quote unquote protecting him. So
Yeah.
we watch, like, I feel like we literally watch as his like inner monologue starts to like slice and like put these pieces together, and we watch him lose faith and trust in everything that he's known and everything that he grew up to be, kind of as it falls through. So they do some, get some blood. He tells him, go lay down. And, oh, but if you don't want to lay down and you want to write a whole book instead, even though you told me that you feel like shit, by all means, if you want to do that, do that. So then Richard leaves, but he leaves with Maram. And as they're leaving, Maram is in the study, and it's Maram, Collins, and Nicholas. And Maram is also, she can't really say much of what's going on. And it's definitely that like library NDA. And who would have thought that working at a library of all places would require such intense care?
Right.
But Maram does confirm that is Nicholas's eyeball floating around in a little jar back there. I like immediately I was like, okay, Hannibal Lecter, let's fucking calm down here.
Right.
Like, let's please relax ourselves. But she confirms that, and then she leaves them instructions for when she's gone. It's in a manila folder, and she's like, here we go. We gotta go. Y'all gotta get the fuck out of here. So that kind of wraps up our part 1 of this book here. And that takes us into part 2, which is called The Scribe.
Dun, dun, dun.
1 per episode minimum.
Right. So at the start of part 2, we're with Esther on the plane, and she's like kind of reminiscing about when she arrived and how, things are getting like kind of full circle. No, I don't want to say that. So Esther's like watching, Antarctica leave and kind of remembering when she was arriving here too, right? Kind of what that felt like. And she also reminisces about when she was trying to, in all of these places every year, right? She has to go somewhere new. And she, went to try to like find her, like more about her mother, right? Because she doesn't know her mother's last name or really much about her.
Mm-hmm.
Like Abe didn't really disclose a lot. And she talks about how she was Skyping her, or video calling. I don't remember if it was actually Skype or not. But yeah. She's like on a video call with her dad and with Abe, and he's just like, you cannot come home. And she's like frustrated because she's like, she definitely wants to come home. And he's like, if there was a loophole, we would know. Like, you can't risk it. And she said she had to like end the call because she just broke down, because she definitely wants to be home and just doesn't really understand fully why she can't, more so than her father just kind of being like, you have to go. There's no choice. You need to do this for your family. So this plane ride to get to where she needs to go is like a ton of different connections, a ton of different planes. So when she's in Auckland, she's actually stopped before she gets on her connecting flight for more security checks. So she gets like pulled into this back room, and then she realizes like, this isn't real.
Yeah.
Which is like, I was like, why? I'm like, nobody's going to pull you out of like, you already made it through TSA. Like, you're boarding the plane. Like,
yeah, like
there's this extra security just for you. Like,
correct.
What's going on here? Be a little suspicious.
Yeah, I think she was like almost so suspicious that she thought that it would be more suspicious if she didn't go along with whatever was happening. But yeah, she gets stopped. There's tranquilizers involved. She recognizes one of the people. Yeah, so basically it is this like network of people that are working to connect Esther back to her sister, and connecting it all boils down to the books and their bloodline, more or less. And we learned even earlier too, we didn't really discuss it, but Esther had detailed like previous times where she was under attack and realizing that she was not safe and she couldn't keep her family safe. And she was with a boyfriend when it happened, and she actually recognized that person later. And the girl that helped her, even though she missed her flight, helped her get on the next flight, routed her somewhere else, getting her back on the plane, told her like he wasn't going to hurt you. Like, this is all, like, this was all to protect you, even though Esther's like, this feels very much like I'm not being protected right now.
Right?
Like
I feel very much threatened, not protected.
Correct. Like, this is the opposite of what I feel like I should be feeling right now. But either way, she finally makes it through this like weird invisible security checkpoint where she was rescued. She gets her ass onto the plane, and on the plane, she is seated next to Nicholas and Collins.
I'm like, finally, everything's coming together.
Yes. I was like, when are these storylines going to converge? And obviously we saw it happen in the mirror, but I was wondering like when it was going to like click.
Yeah. And so like while they're on the plane, like Nicholas is very socially awkward, but also like they recognize her, right, as like girl from the mirror.
Oh, so what happens is like they're sitting next to each other and like they strike up a conversation, and Nicholas is like, oh, do you like books? And she's like, yep. Like, you know how like you're next to people on a plane and you're like, don't fucking talk to me. Don't look at me.
And she's like reading a book and she's like, yeah.
Like, hello.
I'm reading a book.
But he has a book, and it is the book that was stolen from her room, unmistakably her copy he has in his hands. And so she's like, where did you get that? And he's like, Maram gave it to me. And she's like, I don't know who that is. And they're like, she knows who you are. It is just like, why did she send you? Who is Maram? How do you have my book? Like, all of these questions. So they go back and forth, like, we don't know who you are. You don't know who I am. But Maram knows who you are. I have your book. What's happening? But then the boys admit to her that they saw her through the mirror with Trev, or Trethaway. She's like, wait, so it was you that gave me the tickets? Like, what's going on? And they were like, no. Basically, they're all fucking confused. The only person that knows anything is Collins, who can't say anything. Right? He still can't fucking talk. So that's useless. I feel like he's like miming the conversation, like trying to direct it without directing the conversation.
Like the best he can, yeah.
Yeah, but everything straight over Nick's head, straight over Esther's head. They're both confused. They have a lot of thoughts.
Yep. And so they talk, and, when they were watching through the mirror too, like with the memory spell, that's when they kind of realized that she could read a spell without it affecting her, and kind of like clicked. And so they like ask her like, what happened? Like, why can't you, like, magic books, why do they have no effect on you? And she's like, I don't know. Like, they just don't. Like, to her, like, she's just immune to magic, right? Like, she just doesn't think she's magical at all. And then it like clicks to Nicholas. He's like, she's a fucking scribe. Like, literally what he says.
Yep.
Like, you're like me. You're a fucking scribe.
Yes.
And then we realize, okay, no, Esther is magical. Like, Esther is, because she always felt like she wasn't good enough, I feel like, when she was younger, because like Joanna could read these spells, could do things, and
like Joanna would like be able to float off of a swing onto the ground because of a spell that Abe would have her read. And she just never felt like she had a place in the family. And then immediately after she turned 18, having to be ostracized from her family forever, like she never felt like she belonged. So to hear that, she's kind of like,
like, I think she doesn't really understand even what it means.
No.
She's like, okay, cool.
Yep.
All right.
There is one more side character I did forget to mention. So we have the cat, and then we have Sir Kiwi, the precious dog. Sir Kiwi is a girl too, which I think is even better.
Yep.
Precious little angel. And Sir Kiwi does travel with Nicholas and Collins. And I just had to mention that sweet little baby because love it.
Yes. Sir Kiwi. So they decide to not continue on their flight that they like originally planned. So they get off in Boston because Esther's like, I don't know if we should trust everybody. Like, should we trust them to know where we're going? Like, like still very uneasy, right?
Yeah.
And Collins is like, well, I know somebody in Boston. Like, we can get a car. And Nicholas and Esther are like, okay, like, you know somebody in Boston? So they go to this little house, and Nicholas is just like fascinated because he hasn't really like traveled outside of the like basically mansion, and he's like, wow, this house, like, I think he like says it's small, and Esther's like, this isn't small.
Yeah, like
what?
But he grew up in a literal McMansion that's like fucking crazy.
And so we meet like a couple of Collins's old like friends, colleagues. Like we're not really sure of the relationship, but like they offer him cake, and of course like I'm suspicious. I'm like, don't eat the cake, like it's gonna be spelled.
The way that I
wasn't.
have become so suspicious of anyone and anything, like, because I'm like, that's definitely poison. You're gonna die.
Exactly.
That's poison.
I didn't know like if we could trust Collins or not. So I'm
like, I wasn't sure because like with the NDA he can't say much.
I know.
And I just didn't know who to trust, like, period.
But they made it out. They got the car. It's a stick shift, and I think it's funny. They're like, do you know how to drive stick, to Esther? And she's like, yep. Collins is like, what? Like, I feel like he was kind of just like, you know, he's used to being like the protector, like the manly guy. And Esther's like, I'll drive. I know where we're going. Like, we'll be better than you trying to drive stick.
Yep.
So they make it up to Vermont, and Joanna is like shocked that a car is pulling up to her. Like, because she's like, the wards, like, what the heck? So she like pulls out a gun that she's never used and is like prepared to just like protect her house.
Freaking out. I feel like Joanna would be like, in an alternate reality, she would be a doomsday prepper.
Yeah.
Like, she would definitely have a bunker with at least 3 years worth of freeze-dried food. Like,
definitely. So they get there, and Joanna's like, recognizes Esther, right? And is excited to see her sister, but also like, who are these other people? Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And they just like info dump on her, like about the library, about scribes, about all this stuff. And like, just trying to connect the dots, and like things are like making sense, but not making sense. And it's just like, I feel like it's just a lot. Like,
yes.
Nicholas is like, in the morning we can take a look at like the book that killed your dad, and just like all these things. And
and Joanna is pissed too, because she's like, you're a scribe? Like, what the fuck? So I think the problem was, what Joanna's trying to comprehend is that Abe knew the whole time that Esther was a scribe, and didn't give them the luxury of that information or the opportunity to choose how they live their life. He just separated them. So Joanna didn't know really the reasons why Esther was like fucking around the entire world and never speaking to her. And I think it kind of goes back to that letter that Abe left before he died. Like, I feel like he was trying to say something about Esther being a scribe, or like trying to connect her back to her sister. And even still, like, we saw Joanna get like a postcard in the beginning from Esther, and she like rolls her eyes and is like, yeah, sure, you miss me. Sure. Yeah. Okay. And so she's just like, shoot, her head swimming. She's like, I don't know how to process any of this.
And like, Joanna's been trying to write books. So she's been trying to like write spells, trying a bunch of different things, using her blood, different herbs, like watching the moon, all of this stuff. And she's like, oh, it's easy. My sister could have done it. Like, I think there's just like a lot that Joanna's like, cool, And like, Joanna's like frustrated, right? Like, says like she hates her dad, and Esther's like, I don't, she misses him, and they don't understand what it all means and why like Maram sent everybody to Joanna. Like, it just a lot going on, right? And so in the morning, they take a look at the book that killed Abe, and Nicholas says that it's a vampire.
Yes.
Which we learned earlier in the book, right? A vampire, if you try to add your blood, it will like kill you.
Yeah, like sucks the life out of you.
Like a protection spell on the spell, basically. That's already in process. So Joanna kind of remembers like this note that she did find like from her father's like journals or something, where this book that killed him, they've actually had forever, like before Joanna was born. Her dad's note said something like, maybe I'll try to add my blood to it tomorrow. Yeah. So it kind of just connects like, oh, so Abe tried to, add his blood to this vampire book, and that is how he died. And Nicholas is like, this is from the library. Like, this is from our library. Like, this isn't like, this seal isn't like a decorative seal. It's an expiration date. Like, he recognizes it, and he recognizes it as an immortality spell. And because he saw a draft of it in Richard's study.
They talk about how there's like object connections, basically. So the immortality is not only tied to the book, but to like an object itself. And, if you sever the tie between the object and the book, then the spell is no longer. The person who was deemed immortal will, become not immortal anymore, turn to dust. But what's interesting though is this is where I started to like make the connection about like, because I think Abe was revered by both sisters in like such a positive light that I wondered like what was going on with him, like what he experienced, what did he go through for him to do like these very crazy things to his children. And like, did he do it out of love? Did he do it out of fear? Did he do it because he was a bad guy? Like, was he, trying to like keep power for himself? Like, what was it about that? Because up until this point, like I hadn't really like questioned too much of Abe because we only know him through the perspective of the daughters. But like when I found out the book was from the library and it had ties to the library and all of this stuff, I was like, this is fucked.
See, I always thought he was like a crazy old man. Like,
yeah,
that he never really had anybody but him, like self and the book's intentions in mind. They are testing Esther's ability as a scribe. So Esther goes through the process. She's the one that sings the Nirvana song when they like are taking her blood and like getting that ready. But Esther does end up writing a spell with Nicholas's help, and it's the spell to release Collins's NDA.
Yeah,
they work on that. Collins actually convinces Joanna to add his blood to the wards.
Yes,
which I was like, wow, like to get Joanna to do that, I was like, girl.
No, I know, and okay, well, it should be noted one that partially I think because this was an attractive man.
Yeah,
like. There was definitely
and Joanna's been like in the house
alone.
I'm in the house board, the TikTok song.
Like full pandemic throwback. Like she's in no interactions, like unless she does it outside of the house. And she's like, she hasn't had any sort of like romantic encounters since Esther dragged her to parties in high school. And so, yeah, I think that she was partially charmed by him. Also, Nick was kind of persuasive. And there was one other connection. I just saw it on the page, so I just wanted to tie it back in. If you guys remember when Hannah said earlier that when Nick was in the car, he saw like a bee, which was an interesting reference, but Joanna and Collins can hear magic. Like they can sense it. And Joanna mentions that like magic, and even Nick says magic feels like honey. It feels like bees. It feels like a hive. So I thought it was a very interesting tie-in. Like when Esther feels the magic come through her, she says like she can feel like the comb and the honey like crystallizing on her tongue. She can feel the bees moving through her. So a super interesting visual, but it also ties back to like the bees themselves. Yeah, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah. So Collins is added to the wards.
Yes.
And he ends up stealing the wards, the books to put the wards. And Joanna only notices because he's being like super shady about like her not returning to the basement. And then she like finds out that he did that.
Yep.
Then his NDA is broken, and we find all about Collins.
So much.
First that his first name is Nicholas.
I loved that part.
I thought it was hilarious.
So at first though, I was like, okay. Because in my brain, I'm trying to piece everything together. He said it was Nick, and I didn't realize it was supposed to be like a haha moment for like maybe 20 or 30 seconds as I was like listening through this. I was like, oh my God, is Nick not actually Nick? Like
I did have that thought too.
I was like, is Collins Nick? And then something's going on. Is Nick fake? Like, is he pretending to be someone? Like that was my first thought, but it was just like their names are both Nick, which I thought was really funny.
Yeah. And then we find out he was like recruited since he can't sense magic.
Yes.
And then exploited and like kind of forced to stay in that role with like threats to like his sister and his family.
Mm-hmm.
And so he tells them about how Miram told him to like her plan to end the library and showed them a picture of her with a child.
Mm-hmm.
Part of like what he was told to do there, right, was to take the wards down. So that's why he stole out. Like he kind of tells a lot what his NDA is, because he can finally talk about it. And he talks about how the scribe searching spell found a spell that located another scribe who was Miram's daughter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then
Mm-hmm.
we go to part 3.
We sure do.
Which is bloodline.
Mm-hmm. Then we find out that Nicholas kind of like visually puts together the pieces that Esther looks strikingly similar to Maram. And he's like, And so basically is like, Esther, you look just like her. Like, you look just like her. Esther just does not want to believe because she has gone her whole life being disappointed, let down, on the run. She does not want to have an ounce of hope that her mom is still alive. She doesn't want to let herself believe that. But Nicholas is really starting to slot things together. He's realizing, okay, Maram loves this library with her whole being. She wouldn't compromise the library, but she might compromise the library for her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that reason enough? Then, like, I feel like this was like an info download. Like, Nicholas started to put like one piece together and all of a sudden everything started to come down. And then he like slowly realized that Richard looks oddly similar to the founder of the library. Like, not just like bloodline similar, like I think this might be the same person similar.
Right.
And then he starts pointing out little things that he noticed. He's like, well, he does look like perpetually 50 years old. And his gray like never goes past a certain point. It doesn't like fade out anymore. And he's never sick. Like, he's just living. And this is where Nick is like, oh, fuck. My uncle is immortal.
Yep.
Like, oh, shit. So my uncle plucked out my eyeballs, staged my basically assassination attempt, and he's immortal. It was a lot.
Yeah, definitely a lot. And then it comes back to the immortality spell, right? So like the book they found, that like all of this is starting to connect. Finally, all the dots are starting to connect together. And 2 scribes are needed to destroy the spell. So they try and then realize they also need to destroy what Richard has bound his life to.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicholas is like, it's the bone on the portrait. That's what like his life is tied towards. So when they are discovering all this, they also realize that with the wards going down, the mirror might work both ways. So
Yes.
the mirror, when the wards are up, you could send something through it, but something cannot come back. So now that they realize, oh my gosh, the wards are down, like something could come through the mirror. Like if Maram told us to take down the wards, like she knows that.
Mm-hmm.
So then they like rush up to the room and kind of wait to see if something comes through. Then a note does come through and they're like, oh my gosh. And Joanna's like freaking out, gives it to Nicholas and is like, here, read it. And the note reads, we are on our way out of the house. The library will soon be empty. Remember, the path provides the natural next step. And they're like, what the heck? What path? What is this next step? Like,
what is the natural next? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And then Esther has this crazy idea that she remembers when she was putting Trev through the mirror that his hand came back all mangled, but she was unscathed. So she just like dives into the mirror and gets
straight
like
up
pulled back. Yeah. I'm like, girl.
I feel like it speaks to her like impulsivity because like we learned so much about Esther and how she really utilized like sex and relationships and these like other fleeting moments to like fill this void that she had. So I feel like she has this natural like impulsivity to her where she was like, that sounds like a good idea, and just straight
and then she gets pulled back and like she's fine. So then Esther and Nicholas are like, well, since magic doesn't affect us, like we can walk through the mirrors, which is really cool. Like, how cool is that?
Yes.
And so they go through the mirror to Nicholas's house and make their way to Richard's study. So they are under the belief, right, that Maram told them that the house was going to be empty. So they like, are going to like sneak through and destroy the spell.
And they're like looking for the books. Like they're in between these like little rows of shelves. And then Nicholas is like, something is wrong. Yeah.
And then they see Maram and Richard are in the study. And Maram says, I knew they would come. And Richard's holding a gun. So I'm like, fuck, were we not supposed to trust her? Like, I trusted her. I thought she was like
saving her daughter.
But this is my thought. I was like, well, maybe she's like not her mom and she's like the sister. And so she's still, like, I had that thought and I'm like, maybe she's like really is evil.
Yeah.
And like had this picture of like her sister and the baby, you know?
Yep.
I don't know. That was like one of my thought trains.
Yes. And like, yeah, I was shook. I almost had the expectation. I didn't know if Maram was there. I also had the thought that maybe Richard had Maram under like another spell, like, and was like utilizing the information she knew against her, something along those lines. But that's where we leave them. And then we pop back over to an impatient Joanna and Collins just like waiting. And as they're waiting, they're just hanging out. And then they have this like cute little moment and they end up kissing. And I'm not going to lie, I did find Joanna's character fairly bland, like even through like the action parts. Elaine, yes. She's there. She was just there. She's just hanging out. And so like I thought it was really cute, but I wanted more.
Yeah.
From that little situation, but I was like, oh, yay.
Yeah, like it was cute. Like it was just enough. Like just a cute little like kiss. Yes. It wasn't like anything too intimate, but yeah, definitely a little romance moment.
Yeah, but they're interrupted.
Yes, by Miss Cecily. Her own NDA is broken, so she's coming to the house and kind of tells them a little bit about what happens. And so we go back to the study, and Nicholas is like shocked to see Maram there. Like he's like kind of frozen. Like, wait,
yeah,
what? Like he just had his whole world upturned by her, like that nothing was safe,
like betraying him.
Yeah, and he's like, what? Like just wrapping his head around this betrayal.
Yeah.
And while he's like focused on like that and like Richard and just like, you know, his whole life again being turned upside down, Esther's like watching Maram because she's trying to figure out like, is she my mom? Like, do I notice similarities? Like, mix her with Abe, is that me? Like, she's still trying to like wrap her head around like if this is her mother.
Yes.
But then she notices like an expression change, and it's kind of like similar to when Collins's NDA was broken. She like pays attention a little bit closer to what Maram is saying, and then she dives towards Richard. Richard shoots his gun. Nicholas is like freaking out because he's like, oh my gosh, Esther's dead.
Yeah.
Like there's no way that gunshot did not just kill her. But then there's bees. Bees in the trap. Bees in the trap. But so Maram spelled the gun just like earlier, right? When we saw the bee after Nicholas was tried to be assassinated.
Yep.
At that time, Collins's gun was spelled with bees, so instead of shooting out bullets, it would be bees. Same thing happened here, and they're like honeybees, so not like killer wasps or like attacking, right? And so it's just like not like a kerfuffle, basically, right? Like Esther's like attacking Richard. Nicholas is like, "What's going on?"
What a great word, kerfuffle.
Kerfuffle, right? I was like, just a good way to describe it.
I love that.
Just a lot's happening.
Yes.
And then we go back and we find out that like Cecily came back to the house to break another like NDA spell.
Yeah.
Which we connect to Maram, and like that's when her spell was broken.
Yes.
And so we learn about Maram's history. And that she is Isabel.
Yes.
Esther's mom. And
yep.
I like how she wrote her character, because it wasn't like this character was like this mother trying to save her child for the whole time. Like she was selfish.
She was.
Like, she was this young girl who worked at like her grandparents' bookshop, right? And the bookshop had this secret room that if you knew the password, you got to go to the magic books. And she meets Richard, who has like the biggest collection, right, ever. And he says, all right, you got 7 years. If you can prove yourself in 7 years, then you can come like work for me at the library. Yeah. And so she's like infatuated with him, like totally. Yep, anything. So she like basically wines and dines all these like private collectors of these magic books to get them to sell her the books. And so that's how she meets Abe.
Yep. And she really, I feel like she did have like care for Abe.
Definitely.
Like she really did have feelings for him. But when she got pregnant with Esther and she had Esther, she kind of realized like she was not maternal, like at all. She felt like she lacked any and all of those like maternal instincts required.
Mm-hmm.
And like Hannah said, she wanted to be selfish. She was so infatuated and so enthralled by the books, by the library, by the opportunity that Richard had, that to her, having a child was like the worst thing that could have happened to her.
But she, at the 7 years, she knew that she was going to go. Like, she knew Abe, and so she called in Cecily, who was somebody she knew, to kind of watch over Esther. And Abe and Cecily ended up, falling in love and having Joanna. But then they moved to Vermont, and Miram actually paid them a visit randomly, where she kind of revealed what she's learned while being at the library.
Yeah.
And one of the things is that Richard is hunting down scribes.
Correct.
And they know that Esther is a scribe. So they have like this, moment where they kind of hatch this plan to protect Esther.
Yep.
There's like the mirror magic. So they have the mirror. They send the book, the immortality book, for Richard through the mirror. So they hold on to that. Isabel gives them the wards that mirror the wards of the library that like are impenetrable, communication, like nothing like can get through these.
Yeah.
But then they have like all three of them have a silencing spell, like basically an NDA, that they cannot talk about what happened. So this is where like Abe can't tell Esther
why,
kind of what she is, why. This is why he can't say anything. Same with Cecily, she can't say anything. And that's why Miram like, can't say anything to Nicholas, or she can't be under like a true spell with Richard to kind of reveal what she did either. So
yeah,
where she doesn't have that maternal instinct, she still wants to protect that bloodline and that piece for sure.
Yeah, it was, I thought like the way that they revealed it, the way it was all tied together, like this really, like this back half of the book truly sold me on it. And I believe it was her debut novel, if I'm not mistaken. And I feel like the writing in here and the way she was able to tie a story together shows so much promise. Like it really was just like beautifully written. But
yeah,
after we find all of that, we, come back over and Nicholas does end up shooting the bone that held Richard's immortality. That was the object that it held. And we watch Richard disintegrate.
Because, they shoot the bone and then they destroy the book. Like Esther and Nicholas.
Yeah, and like it shouldn't have been able to be ripped. Like it was leather bound. It was
human skin bound.
Yes. Like, yeah, disgusting. But like it was, the way Nicholas described it was basically, it was like impenetrable. Like you could not do anything about it. But we see Nicholas and Esther, hands on either side. And when they pull it, it just shreds. It just rips apart. And then Richard just disintegrates into dust.
Yep. He gone.
Yes.
And so, yeah. That is their life.
Yeah. And the library is left to Nicholas. And I think it's so funny because he's just a boy who was trapped in a castle his whole life. So he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing with the staff and like how to run a property. So Collins is like, bro, what are you doing?
Yeah, he says like, you guys are all free to go, because to him, like, he was trapped there.
Yes.
And he tells like the staff, you guys are free to go. And Collins is like, they're not like indentured servants, like they're staff,
employees.
like he hired them. And like Nicholas doesn't understand. It's like, oh, and Collins is like, you just basically fired them. Like, do you want to make your own food? Like, no. But Miram does vanish.
She does.
Like, Esther and her do have some like time together a little bit, and like can ask some questions. And Miram's disappearance, there is a note that she leaves, and it says, "Dear Nicholas and Esther, I've always wanted what is best for the library. I've also always wanted, in my own way, what is best for you. It has become apparent that I myself am neither. What I am best for then, I aim to find out. There is so much to learn still about everything. So, I think it's like just self-aware that Mom's like, I can't be that mother, that maternal figure to both you, like Nicholas and Esther.
Yeah.
Even though like she wants to be, but she just knows she can't.
Yeah, she just knows she's not. Yeah.
So she just kind of went off on her own and now doing her own thing.
Yep. And then we see Joanna take her first plane ride ever because she was, again, trapped. Like, I feel like her and Nicholas had, a lot of parallels.
Yep.
So Joanna's on the plane and Esther's with her and they're going to London, and then they get picked up by Collins, and Collins like traps Joanna in this like massive hug, and Esther's like, whoa, like, sir, calm down, calm yourself down. But they're in the car, they're talking. Pearl ends up calling Esther after Esther had sent her like a book about these spells, like told her what to do, introduced her to magic. And so she has like a little video call with Pearl in the back seat, and Collins is like, put it on speaker, put it over the speakers, we want to know. But they're talking, and it seems like they're going to reconnect, which I really enjoyed. And then Collins does ask Joanna out to dinner, which I thought was cute.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, well, Nicholas gave me his credit card and told me to take you somewhere fancy. And she's like, oh, it doesn't have to be fancy. He's like, just because it doesn't have to be doesn't mean we shouldn't enjoy a fancy dinner. Like,
right.
Just really cute. And at the end, they plan to like open up the lines of magic to expand beyond what these limited bloodlines have been. And because all of these other scribes have been hunted down and killed, for all they know, like Esther and Nicholas are the only two kind of remaining right now. And so they're just figuring out what the next steps are for magic in the world, and they just want to create a better world for each other and for everything. And yeah, it was a nice little ending to Ink Blood Sister Scribe.
Yeah. I thought it was a good little like magical world, but nothing too heavy.
Correct. Yes.
And same thing with like One Dark Window, just kind of a cool magic system.
Yeah.
Like just a little different than like inherent magic, like just the way it...
Yeah, a little bit different than more of like the mythical side of magic. Like interesting, that it falls within bloodlines. I thought that the way that scribes worked was really cool. Like how they have to use like their own blood as ink, and that's how they have to pen things. So yeah, definitely thought that was cool. And yeah, I am really happy that we decided to pick this so I could, persevere through the first chunk of the book.
Right, because I feel like it just helps. Like it's not like a one that I like had to suffer through till the end.
Yes.
But it was one that kind of, I'm glad I read it.
I am too. And it's like, it wasn't like the first chunk of the book was bad by any means, but I feel like it was just lacking like I wanted something else to kind of really come through. And I wonder if maybe we had like one little like jump from Joanna's side, like if there was something like a little bit more, if it would have just flowed better. But regardless, really enjoyed it. Thought it was a great book.
Definitely. One thing I will say too, like with the cat, I thought the cat was gonna like turn into somebody.
I did too.
Like because I thought maybe like it couldn't enter the house because of the wards.
Yes.
So once the wards dropped, I thought it was gonna like morph into a human.
I thought it was gonna be Abe.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's gonna be her dad, like reincarnated. But yeah, no, I enjoyed it.
Definitely. All right. Well, let's talk about Florence and Taylor.
Florence and Taylor. I think Florence was like front of mind for me because of Taylor, because of Florida. So I was like, oh, this feels good. So I picked Dog Days Are Over by Florence and the Machine. And the reason that I picked this was because it really is just a song about like leaving all of like the despair that you've had in the past, all of these trying times, and just looking forward. But it is also about carrying a lot of baggage and having gone through a lot of things. So it starts off with happiness hit her like a train on a track, coming towards her, stuck, still no turning back. And I feel like happiness could be really anything for any of our characters in this way. Like, Joanna and Nicholas getting to experience the world for the first time. Esther really finding like true love and feelings within her relationship with Pearl. But specifically the next line is, she hid around corners and she hid under beds. She killed it with kisses, and from it she fled. With every bubble she sank with a drink and washed it away down the kitchen sink. And for me, I think I just connected the most to Esther. So my thought process was more so in the vein of Esther. But like, she hid around corners and she hid under beds. Like, Esther fled every single year away from her life, away from her family, to protect her family for the reason unknown. She didn't know, but the chorus, I feel like everyone kind of knows. Like, if you don't know this song, if you listen to it, you know this song. Like, everyone knows this one. But the pre-chorus is, the dog days are over, the dog days are done, the horses are coming, so you better run. And it's, run fast for your mother, run fast for your father, run for your children, for your sisters and brothers. Leave all your love and your longing behind. You can't carry it with you if you want to survive. And I think it's just a really good reference to like all of this baggage that they've carried over the years. Like, Joanna carrying the weight of their own personal collection and the books that she was basically sworn her life to carry. Esther literally severing ties with the people that she loved most to protect them. And you have to leave that behind if you want to move forward. And the bridge is, I never wanted anything from you except everything you had and what was left after that too. And it goes back into the happiness hit her like a bullet in the back, struck from a great height by someone who should have known better than that. And I don't know, I just like the vibe of the song feels like the end, where like Esther has like magic thrumming through her veins that she can finally feel after not belonging for so long, and finding true settling like happiness, and Nick not having to be on edge that he was going to be assassinated around every fucking corner by the people that were protecting him. I think like it's almost less about like the actual words itself and more about like the messaging behind them of like, the dog days are over. Like, the dog days are done. We are here. We're going to move forward. We're going to create a better world. We're going to learn what this magic is. We're going to work on it together. We're going to create like a new lineage of scribes. But in order to do that, we have to leave all of this trauma that we've experienced behind. Like, we have to learn how to trust each other. We have to learn how to move forward. And, it's just, unfortunately, the lyrics do repeat themselves quite a lot. But I think the line specifically after, the dog days are over, the dog days are done. For me, it's, leave all your love and your longing behind. You can't carry it with you if you want to survive, is kind of the theme of this. Like, every one of these people have been through so much, even Collins included. Like, he was under an NDA spell where he couldn't speak. He couldn't even say his first name. He had to watch all of this stuff happen and he couldn't say anything about it. And then he had come to be friends with Nicholas in a way that I don't think either of them really expected. And so they had to leave all of that baggage behind. And I feel like we talk about this a lot, but it is like, I do think of books cinematically. Like, that's just how my brain kind of operates. And this is a song at the end where everything is coming down. Everything is like, they're finding happiness again. They're finding their own footing again. I feel like this is a song that would play toward the end of this kind of sequence. So that's why I picked that song. It was the vibes and the general message of it that I feel like I connected with the most.
Yeah. Oh, great song. Great song. I picked The Bolter. Talk about leaving, right? The Bolter right there. But there's like different lines in this song that kind of touched on every character for me almost.
Yeah.
So the first one is the line, it's a curious child ever reviled by everyone except her own father. So it kind of just reminded me of Esther and how, like, as a kid, right, she just felt like she was not good enough, and like her dad focused on like Joanna's magic and that piece. Now we know, right, like looking back, that he was like under a spell that he couldn't really talk about it, kind of what made her special there. Then the other line in the first part here is, splendidly selfish, charmingly helpless, excellent fun till you get to know her, then she runs like it's a race. And that reminded me of Miram or Isabel, like when she was younger, right? Kind of like, you know, being selfish, like kind of helpless when it comes to that like mother side, you know, but she's fun in the fact that like she's so in love with the library and the books. But then she's like, bye. Like that's my real love is the books. So nicknaming you the Bolter. Goodbye. Later it talks about like wanted her bad just like any good trophy hunter. Which obviously is Richard, right? He just wants that like the trophies of the scribes and really kind of only wants that one scribe alive at a time, because if there's two then they can destroy the spell, you know, so he's like wanting those, kind of hunting for that. And then right after it says taming a bear, making him care, watching him jump then pulling him under, kind of reminded me of like Miram, like kind of with Richard, right? Because she was like, you know, so infatuated with him and kind of what he was doing, but then when she realized like I can kind of maybe manipulate him a little bit, right, to kind of get what she wanted, because once she realized like I feel like that she wanted the books more so than like Richard, that's when her like loyalty changed too. Like I think with finding all Richard's like bad qualities, she's like, okay, what do I really love? Am I infatuated with Richard and his like idealism, or am I infatuated with the books? And so she kind of was like, I can kind of tame him. And part of the chorus is all her fucking lives flash before her eyes. It feels like the time she fell through the ice then came out alive. And I feel like that's like all of them, right? It's kind of like when they've had these realizations, it's like all of these different, like peeling back the onion, all these different like ideas and lives and just different things that they like, you know, fell through, but then they had to like come out alive with it. Kind of just paralleled that for me there.
Totally.
And the bridge is, she's been many places with men of many faces. First they're off to the races, then she's laughing, drawing aces. But none of it is changing, that the chariot is waiting. Hearts are hers for the breaking. There's an escape in escaping. And so just like that flow just kind of reminds me of like, I think Esther and Isabel Miram are like very parallels of like each other. About like they're leaving and wanting to protect and just kind of that piece. And, you know, first they do this, then they're like, you know, just kind of laughing through it, but really what's waiting for them is going to be there. And then they realize like they need to escape, like their escape is escaping, you know, kind of that Bolter piece there with that. So
I love it.
Just the Bolter, like the title itself, just the kind of like link to Esther and Miram for me, which just like their parallels there.
Yep. I love it. All right. Are we ready to talk about our book ratings?
Let's do it.
For those that are new, we like to rate in to the moon and to Saturn because the standard star scale just doesn't like fit the vibe, doesn't feel right. So I rate in moons, Hannah rates in Saturns, and this book, I'm going to be honest, when I started this book, I was like, this is going to be like a 3, maybe like a 2.5. I'm a little worried. I'm a little concerned. But by the point where like everything started connecting, I really enjoyed this book. Like I had a great reading experience. So I feel like I'm going to land on 4 moons. I feel like it's a good rounded, like it was a really fun read. I can't give it more than 4 because I did struggle a lot in the beginning, but I think that the back half truly made up for what I was lacking in the front half.
No, I'm right there with you. Like same thing, 4 Saturns. Like can't give it any more. I don't think it's fair to give it less because I really enjoyed it. Like I ended this book and I was like, oh, that was great. One of my friends actually recommended it for us. And so as immediately when I finished it, she's like, what did you think?
Yeah.
But definitely no. I think 4 Saturns, it just, that feels right.
I agree.
I was worried too because when we were like early in the book, I saw this like screenshot, or I saw this post on Facebook that this girl was like, my 5-star reads, and the first 3 books were Starling House, Lost Apothecary, then Ink Blood Sister Scribe. And I was like, what are we getting ourselves into? Because if you've been listening to the podcast, those other 2 books were not some of our top rated ones.
Mm-mm.
So I was like, uh-oh, is this going to fall in the same category? But
Yeah.
no, it fell very, very high compared
Absolutely.
to those.
Agreed. So that was Ink Blood Sister Scribe. And our next book, which is going to be our 11th episode of season 2, we are so excited for this episode. So this was actually Hannah's pick. She suggested it to me because she loves this book and we really wanted to talk about it. So if you've been living under a rock, I'm so sorry that you haven't heard of this book, but we are going to take on the historical fiction / romance, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid.
Yes, I'm so excited for this one.
Yes.
It's a reread for me, which I was ecstatic to reread it because it's been almost, I think, 3 years since I've read it. Right?
Yeah, I think you said it's been a minute. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was excited to read it for the first time. It's my first Taylor Jenkins Reid book. And now it makes me excited to, want to look at the rest of her work. And yeah, I feel like that's going to be a good episode. I'm not going to lie. I have good vibes about that one.
And we're like, Taylor is like lucky number 13. Like 11 is special for us because that's our birth month, November 11th. So it's a lucky episode for us.
That'll be a good one.
But thanks for listening, guys. We really appreciate you. Rate and review the podcast if you have a second. Your feedback is important to us.
Yes.
And follow us on social media.
TikTok, Instagram. Our Discord's like kind of just chilling, but we would love to build it up eventually with a little community. And then we also have a Patreon. So if you are interested in supporting the podcast and getting exclusive behind the scenes content, you also get exclusive content early. So you get first looks at our book choices and maybe any upcoming, things that we have going on. If we end up releasing, I don't know, we've been talking about it, nothing set in stone, but maybe we're going to do some merch in the future. And if you're part of the Patreon, you would be the first to know with first dibs.
Yep. And we are not asking for a lot, $5 a month, which is less than a coffee,
Mm-hmm.
So we would love your support just to continue to bring you some nice reviews for books. But yeah, thanks for listening.
Thanks so much.
Just keep reading with kindness, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon. We'll see you on July 3rd. Bye, everyone.
Bye.